We talked a lot about the theory of course setting. Now we're going to talk about some of the nitty-gritty and the practical aspects, because you have great ideas in your head, but if we don't go through a right procedure in the weeks and months before you're setting your courses, some things might get missed or what have you. So we're going to concentrate now on some best practices for making courses and events the best they can be. So these are some of the big broad phases in the course setting process, and we'll go into them in some detail as we go through this. So laying the groundwork. Now, the time frames we're talking about here are guidelines. I mean, there are going to be different situations. Sometimes you may need more time, and sometimes it may be an area that you know well, and you might be able to do things a little bit more quickly. But as a general context, we're thinking about doing this phase 3 to 4 months prior to the event. So the number one thing is we need to have permission to use an area, right? There's nothing more frustrating than you're doing a lot of work and then realizing that we don't have a permit to use an area. So that's something that you want to make sure you get taken care of. That's something that in most cases Mary Frank will be the go-to person for that. And you'll see that we've already put together the 2013 schedule. So for an event to go on the schedule, it should ideally be something that we either had permission for or anticipate being able to get permission for. So once you have permission, you want to figure out if there are other big picture considerations for using an area. Are there environmentally sensitive areas? Is an area like Fair Hill, which is a big multi-use area. It has all sorts of different events going on. Are there fees that you have to pay? Some places will have parking charges, some places might have a per user charge. And then, of course, one of the very big things is the potential start and finish areas, because as we know, for almost all the courses, the start and the finish and the parking are going to dictate really where your courses can go. So, step 2, once we know where we're going to do it, once we know that we can do it and the broad brush logistics are worked out, the big thing to do is actually get out there and see the terrain. And that's something that we're going to emphasize a lot, that a lot of stuff you can do at home in your armchair, but the key thing to making good courses is actually get out there and just get a feel for the terrain, get a feel for the map, and what have you. So get out there and assess the map quality. Now that's something, there can be a big range. The great thing about DVOA is that we have a lot of high quality maps, but we also have a lot of maps, and we can't keep all the maps at the same standard all the time. For instance, Brandywine. Well, until recently, Brandywine was an older map. I think it was made during the 90s. It was fine, but it had some issues. So in this phase of the process, it's really important to see what the map is like. Does it have limitations? Are there areas that are just completely wrong and you want to avoid? Are there areas that are out of bounds, or is there potentially an issue with a private landholder that you just want to give maybe a little bit more latitude to? And then, again, select the start and finish area. And that's going to incorporate all these things, and especially parking. Is there an area you can use that allows people to park? And especially at a local event, you typically want to keep the logistics on the simpler side, so you won't necessarily have the flexibility that we do in an A event where you might consider busing and all that stuff. Parking is often going to dictate where you can put the start and finish. So then, we can start to get into some more fun stuff, and that's what Tom was talking about earlier. What does the terrain support? Now, I've run some very nice courses here at Myrick Center, but Myrick, as you can see, it's not really a big area. It would probably be pretty ludicrous to have a blue course here. Now that doesn't mean you can't have fun orienteering, but oftentimes when we use Myrick for anything beyond white and yellow, it's more of some sort of special event. Like we've had the Vice President's Cup here, we have a Halloween Night-O here, and those are some variations in orienteering that allow you to do some advanced type orienteering in a very small area. So, but other places like Fair Hill, you can do an orienteering marathon on. So it's really a matter of understanding what the area allows you to do. So then determine approximate course lengths, and that's going to be part of the process of assessing how fast the terrain is. Is an area like Fair Hill that has a lot of open fields, or even an area like Collier's Mills in New Jersey, which is has some more woods, but it's so flat and has minimal ground cover, minimal stuff, so you can, for advanced runners, they can run 5 minutes per kilometer, whereas a place like
Ridley?
Well, Ridley's a nice place too. Governor Dick, out towards Lebanon, is a place that, under most circumstances, people cannot run very fast there. So Collier's Mills, a blue runner may run 5 or 6 minutes per K. At Governor Dick, they may run 9 or 10 minutes per K, and that would be winning time. So here we go. Now we get into the fun stuff. Design the courses in Condes. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. So that's step 3, and now some more step 3. So, and this is really something important to bear in mind, and I think I recently ran into some problems there. You really want to make sure that you have enough E-punches for the number of controls you use. And as Vadim mentioned, typically, well, actually all the time, Condes will start numbering at 31, and they'll number sequentially as you add controls. But the E-punches we have, I think, stop in the 80s.
80.
So that basically gives you 50 controls to work with. For a local event, for one day, that's actually probably more than enough. I mean, if you're using 50 controls in a local event, that would be a pretty exceptional circumstance.
This is no.
But it just, it's going to make your job harder if you have 50 controls. I mean, you might need it, but again, just keep that in the back of your mind. 50 controls is at the higher end of what you want to use. So prepare preliminary control descriptions, and then engage a course consultant. And that's something that I really strongly recommend. When we did NAOC, for instance, we all had course consultants, and Tom was the director of course hitting, so he was another course consultant. So, no matter how experienced you are, having someone to bounce ideas off and to ask questions, and if you think of that, is really invaluable. All right, so step 4, evaluate courses in the field. And this, I think, is where it really starts to be fun. So, and as Tom noted, this is the single most critical step in the course setting process. And I would emphasize that if we could make that flash. Because it really ties in everything. I mean, the issue of fairness, the issue of enjoyability, which in my mind are two of the most important parts about course setting. The courses you set need to be fair for all competitors, and they should be enjoyable. And without getting into the terrain and understanding how the courses flow and how the controls look and how different legs, a left leg versus a right leg, actually look in the field, you can't really ensure fairness. So visit every control site and test questionable route choices. So you really have to, even more than visit every control site, well, visit potential control sites too. So you might find controls on the map that look really great, and you come up with this design that's great in the map, but until you get out there, there may be a control which may not look as good on paper, but it's just aesthetically nice, or is you know, just it sets up something in a way that you can't really see until you get out there. So budgeting enough time to get out there a couple times and try, you know, just walk through some of the legs is really important. And then test questionable route choices, and that's where you really, if there's a route choice which you intend people to use, or you think people might use, it's really important that you understand that the map actually corresponds with reality. So, verify and fine-tune control descriptions. So, and that's when I do this, I typically will take a little notebook out there and make notes about the control description that, you know, I think I'm going to use. You know, sometimes at this stage you may want to, if you're using a course consultant and it's a big event, you may want to start sharing your control descriptions with your course consultant or vetter. And you know, Tom helped out a lot in this respect, that you know, he would say, well, you know, I think that's actually the northeast side rather than the north side. And I would say, well, you know, I think you're wrong, but you know, at the end of the day, I would typically concede to his point of view. But those are good conversations to have, and or it may be, you know, something like you know, just the other parts of describing the control. I mean, obviously a boulder is a boulder, but you know, how high is it? You know, what side is it? Is it, or if it's a reentrant, is it a shallow reentrant? Things like that. So, step 5, finalize the course design. And you know, again, you know, in all these things, it's going to be an iterative process. So you'll never really be done until a little bit closer. So you're going to incorporate revisions from the field visit. You should be able to really nail down the course length and climb according to what we talked about earlier. Determine the water stop locations. Now, as Tom mentioned there, you typically want to you know, err on the side of simplicity for your sake. But you know, at the same time, you generally don't want to compromise your orienteering course design due to a water stop. So ideally, that's something that you might want to think about early in the course setting process, especially if it's a big event and you expect a lot of competitors. For instance, at the long course at NAIOC, there might have been some opportunities there to have some more water stops at places in the course that competitors would have been expected to pass through, which wouldn't necessarily have been out of control. So if you think about those things early in the process, that can play into when you're setting your long legs and things like that. You may actually be able to have a number of courses use similar corridors such that they're going to visit one spot on the road or a couple spots along a road where you can put water, as opposed to having to carry your water out to 4 different controls in the woods. And you know, believe me, you'll thank yourself later for deciding to put control or water stops along a road rather than all out in the forest. But you know, again, water stops should be secondary to the course setting. So if you know, the best course requires putting a water stop in the woods, well, you know, that's a sacrifice I guess we have to make. So finalize the control descriptions, prepare the courses for printing, and then finally email the course information to the ePunch coordinator for programming a computer. And you know, because you know, there are a lot of different people involved in the process, especially if you know, someone else is going to be overprinting your courses, and then someone else is going to be running the ePunch for your event. You should really allow yourself enough time, you know, for instance, a month beforehand, to get that stuff to the requisite people, because you know, as a courtesy to them, and because people have different schedules, getting that stuff nailed down as quickly as possible is a good thing. So, assemble the equipment, and this is something that you really have to take seriously too. So, there's a lot of equipment that's involved in course setting.
One point here is some of this stuff is done by the event director. Like now we're getting into some of this. So
Yes.
if you're the course setter and event director, you'll do this, but other times the event director might help
Yes.
you with some of this.
And this is actually a really important to emphasize. Tom, for instance, was not necessarily the course setter or the event director at last year's Ridley event, but he did some things that you might have expected the event director to do, and he did those very graciously, so we appreciate that. So, obtain the event kit, the map bags, check inventory kit. Again, those might be things the event director would do. Get the express check-in list, and order portable toilets. Again, those are generally event director things, but in either case, there are things that have to be done if they're relevant. So, streamer control sites. And here we have 2 weeks prior to the event. In the case of a local event, that's timing that makes sense. If it was an A event, you'd probably want to have that done well in advance to allow veterans time to get in there. So, this is actually a really important thing. And it's something that it surprises me that people in other clubs don't necessarily do. And I don't even want to say that this is a possibility, but sometimes people in other clubs don't actually streamer their controls and just put out a control. And there's nothing that's a bigger recipe for a disaster than that. So I don't even want to admit that that's something that people can do. We certainly don't do it in DVOA, and Tom would really be upset if that happened.
But there are some parks that don't like streamers, so in that case we have to respect their wishes.
Yes. So, but the point about putting streamers out in advance is it really allows you to pinpoint where the control is going to go in a more low stress environment, right? And that's really what the key is, to be able to allow yourself more than enough time to actually identify, well, it's actually, the control should go right there, and do that with care. Because if you left that until the day of the event, there's so many things that can go wrong. You may be under time pressure, and things can get missed. And so here we say a good practice is to place the stake for the e-punch stand and tie the streamer to the stake. And that's actually a good thing, because that way you can actually say, well, this is where the actual control is going to go, and it really takes all of the uncertainty out of it, because there may be a couple different places where the control could go, but as a course setter, you really think that this is the cleanest location. And if you're going to have other people help you to hang controls, well, by putting the stake and putting the streamer on it, you're really able to say, well, this is where I think the best place is, and it takes a lot of the uncertainty out of things. This part down here is something that is really nice to consider. Ideally early on, if there was a control area that was really junky, you probably would have eliminated it. If it's a reentrant, that would have been nice, but it has lots of deadfall, it might not be an area you can use. But if it's an area that passed muster, you think you're going to use it, and maybe there was some wind or something in the week or two before, you might want to go out there and see if you can drag some of the stuff out of there, or what have you. So
chainsaw.
Yeah, so just kidding. So at NAOC,
set of pruning shears.
Yes, we had various types of equipment that were used in that way. So printing. So printing is a really important thing. As we said before, we prefer to use offset maps and then have the course overprinting. And in 95% of the cases, that's going to be the optimal way to do things. But in the event that it's not, you definitely want to make sure you try to establish familiarity with where the maps are going to be printed, so you make sure they can do a good job and you know what the timing is and what have you. So all these people here, Fred, Sandy, Bob Gross, Ralph Tolbert, have the capability of doing overprinting.
Mary Frank too.
And Mary also. So you can reach out to any of those people, and they can help out. Assuming you just provide the Condes file and the map file if necessary. So this part down here, again, Tom talked a little bit about that. The DVOA website is a great source of information about previous events, and unless you're using a new area, obviously there will have been events there before, and so you can kind of look and try to see, well, was that a nice day? Was it peak season? So you can get an idea for how many people might go there, and it's always much, much better to err on the side of printing too many maps, right? Because there's nothing worse than hand-drawing maps. It's horrible. And offset printed maps are fairly inexpensive. So it's better to print 5 or 10 more, or 10 or 15 more than you think you would possibly need than having to draw maps, because it takes a long time to draw a map and then it can be wrong. And typically, if somebody needs to draw a map at the event, it's going to be one of the more experienced people doing it, which means that some other job's not being done. And so there's this ripple effect. So by printing a lot of maps beforehand, you're able to prevent some other bad things from happening. So there we go. Send the Condes file and accompanying map file to the person. Oh, and the second bullet point is really important. Well, one, it's a courtesy to help out with the map printing, but then it's also, because you're the course setter, you're also going to know really where the control circle is supposed to be placed, and really to have two sets of eyes there is great for quality control and making sure things are going well. So, third bullet point, also very important, you really want to have a couple extra copies of the master map with all the controls on it. And when you're doing the course overprinting, it's very easy just to run off a master control map, and then when you're doing control hang or control pickup, you have that. And then print the control descriptions. Again, if you're not printing the control descriptions on the map, you'll want at least one copy for every map, and then at least one extra copy for everybody, and then some extra copies there. So you basically want to have a bunch of them. So then paper vetting. So paper vetting is actually something that's gotten easier with Condes because fewer things can go wrong. But for instance, if you're printing out, or if you're overprinting them, printing out separate control descriptions, you have to make sure the right control description goes in the right map. And that's happened when people have had a control description on the wrong map, so you have to be very careful with that. Check every map for registration, inequality, control description, all that stuff. Oftentimes, if you're printing 40 maps in the overprint and inkjet thing, there can be drift between the 10th and the 20th map, and normally the people that do the overprinting know this, and I know Sandy will just print 5 at a time and check every one. But that's just something to watch out for, because even maps from the printer can have they can be cut differently, and so they could be like half a millimeter off, so you just have to check every one. And then finally, keep the mags, or the maps for each course in a separate container, and that's a really great thing too. One thing to do is maybe get some of the paper shopping bags, or some plastic bins, because it's really nice to be able to just take all the maps out to the start and plop them down. Sometimes in courses, and increasingly more so, we'll have starts that are unattended. That, I don't know if that's good or bad, but having the maps in easily identifiable containers just makes it easier for everybody. So, step 10, the final prep. And so, estimate the amount of water, buy the water, You know, the refreshments for workers or participants, that's, again, might be an event director job. The e-punch kit, the punches, stake stands, computer, and then, you know, enter the course info and event notes onto the DVOA website. And that's, you know, something that's nice to have for people, you know, again, maybe about a week prior to the event, so they can see, oh, the event's coming up, and here are the courses, and they may decide, oh, well, you know, I'm going to do green that day or red that day. If they know that, you know, the red course is maybe a little bit on the long side, they may, you know, get themselves psyched up to do whatever. So then, hanging controls, and this is where it gets interesting, and obviously it's good to have an extra set of hands. Prior to hanging controls, you have to make sure all your e-punches are synchronized. And, you know, that's, you know, really important because, you know, basically you just have to make sure that, you know, all the stations are reading the correct time, so everything's in sync. Point two, and you know, that's a really important point too. You should really, you know, try to find people that are experienced, that are advanced orienteers, and that you have a decent idea how fast they are. I mean, you don't need to use fast people to help hang your controls, but you should have an idea, well, can they, you know, hang 6 controls in an hour, or can they only hang 3 controls in an hour? Because you have to, you definitely want to be able to budget your people and resources so that you have the right people hanging the right controls. And so
it's best to hang the controls the day before the event. With e-punch sometimes, for white and maybe some of the yellow, if they're right on trails and you're worried about the e-punch units getting stolen, you can put those out the morning of the event. But waiting until the morning of the event to hang all your controls, very, very bad idea. Because like Clem said, you're going to be under time pressure and you'll leave yourself no room for error. We've had events where people have actually started on courses when controls were not yet placed. And after driving an hour and a half each direction to get there, they're not real happy when stuff like that happens. So do as much ahead of time as possible.
Yes, and so, yes, so generally, a lot of our meets are on Sundays, which, you know, I personally like because that gives you Saturday to do a lot of these things. And ideally, yes, you want to get out as many of your, typically your advanced controls on Saturday, things that are away from control or away from trails that people aren't likely to stumble upon. And then if you do it that way, you can just leave yourself a white and yellow for Sunday, and that typically is something that's much more manageable in maybe an hour on Sunday morning. So take a sturdy bag with a secure closure, and, you know, that sounds like, you know, simple, silly advice, but, you know, nothing is worse than losing anything. But you especially don't want to lose an e-punch. One, because we don't have that many of them, and then they're expensive, and so, you know, just having a sturdy backpack. You know, I like to, you know, have a backpack with pockets, and I'll have my e-punch units in one pocket. You know, if you're taking out stands, we have, you know, some of these long, I don't know, tent pole bags for stands. And one other thing I'll mention here, it's not on there. You know, Tom and I like to use these rubber mallets for putting in the fiberglass stakes, because you'll know that, or you'll notice that the stands we use are typically these PVC pipes that go over a little fiberglass stake. So in some ground, getting the fiberglass stake can actually be kind of difficult to do. So you don't want to go out there and not have something to get the stake in the ground. So having one of these rubber mallets, you can get them at Home Depot, is a great thing. Because if you go out there and you don't have anything, you might pick up a rock, and then you're kind of like a caveman, and, you know, that's embarrassing. But not only that, you'll start to destroy the stakes, and, you know, then Ron Bortz, who does a great job with all our equipment, has to make new ones. But with a rubber mallet, you can get them into just about anything. They don't damage the stakes, and it's just much better. So here, that's something else that, you know, we should put in red.